I never expected two women at the gym to notice me, let alone corner me by the locker room, with smiles that felt more like an invitation than a trap. The gym has never really felt like my natural territory. I go because I know I should, because part of me hopes the steady rhythm of routine might shape not only my body, but also my scattered mind. Still, every time I step inside, I feel a little out of place among the clang of weights, the thud of sneakers against treadmills, and the easy confidence of people who seem to belong there more than I do. But then there are the two women. I noticed them before I ever exchanged a word with them. Not because they were loud or attention-seeking, quite the opposite. They carried themselves with a kind of unshakable poise, the kind you don't learn from social media tutorials or quick fixes, but from years of simply knowing who you are. The taller one always caught my eye first. She wore her hair in a tight bun, not a strand out of place, and she moved with a grace that made even simple stretches look deliberate, almost elegant. She wasn't just strong. She was composed, like she carried her own atmosphere with her. Her friend was different. Softer somehow, at least on the surface. Her smile seemed ready for anyone. The kind of smile that could make a stranger feel welcome without a word. I'd watch her encourage people, sometimes just with a nod, sometimes with a quiet, "You've got this," to another woman struggling through a set. Where the first one was striking, this one was warm. Together, they were impossible not to notice. And yet, I always kept my distance. I'd glance at them from the treadmill, pretending to focus on the blinking numbers on the screen while stealing quick looks when I thought they weren't aware. It was harmless curiosity, I told myself. Nothing more. But one evening, everything shifted. I had just finished my workout and was heading toward the locker room, still catching my breath, when I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced up, and there they were, both standing near the stretching mats, their gazes casually, but undeniably, fixed on me. For a second I panicked, convinced they'd caught me in my not-so-subtle habit of noticing them. But instead of looking away, they exchanged a quick glance with each other, followed by a shared smile. Not mocking, not dismissive, something else. Something knowing. It stopped me in my tracks. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus drifting from the steam room, and in that moment the background noise of the gym, the weights clattering, the music pulsing, seemed to blur. All I registered was the quiet curve of their smiles and the fact that, for the first time, I felt noticed. Not invisible, not background noise, but seen. And as I stepped into the locker room, their laughter followed me, light and unhurried, echoing just enough to linger in my chest. That was the glance that started everything. The next time it happened, it didn't feel like an accident. I was refilling my water bottle at the fountain, still flushed from a run, when I heard a voice behind me. Low, steady, carrying a trace of amusement. "How long have you been coming here?" I turned, and it was her, the taller one, the one with the bun that never seemed to come loose no matter how intense her workout. She stood just close enough that I caught the clean, faintly floral scent of her perfume layered over the sharper tang of gym air. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes held a quiet challenge, as if she already knew the answer but wanted to hear me say it. Before I could respond, her friend stepped up beside her, leaning casually against the wall with her arms folded, her smile already there, bright but steady. She added, "Yeah, we've seen you around. Always at the treadmill. Same time as us." I tried to laugh it off, adjusting my grip on the bottle. "I guess I'm a creature of habit." Or, the softer one teased, tilting her head slightly, "Maybe you just like our company from a distance." It was a playful comment, but the way she looked at me, straight into my eyes, with that kind of warmth that left little room for denial, made my throat dry. I didn't know what to say, and for a second I wished the water fountain would save me with some kind of distraction. Instead, the taller woman rescued me. "He's blushing," she said softly, not unkindly, more like she was observing something interesting. And she wasn't wrong. I could feel the heat rising up my neck. They both laughed then, but not in a cruel way. It was light, almost musical, the kind of laughter that makes you want to hear it again, even if you're the reason for it. "Relax," the warmer one said, still smiling. She reached for the towel draped over her shoulder, then held it out toward me. "Here, you look like you could use this more than me." I hesitated but accepted it. Her fingers brushed against mine, just the lightest contact, but enough to send a small, surprising warmth through me. My hand tingled even after I pulled back. There was something disarming about the way they stood there, one leaning casually with her eyes never leaving mine, the other straight and confident, her presence steady, her gaze sharper. It was like being in the center of a conversation I hadn't planned for, yet couldn't walk away from. And strangely, I didn't want to. We talked for a few more minutes, simple things, workouts, schedules, how crowded the gym could get at night. Nothing earth-shattering. But beneath it all was this quiet undercurrent, a sense that the words themselves mattered less than the closeness, the attention, the way their voices seemed directed at me alone. When they finally moved on, heading toward the mats, I found myself standing there longer than I should have, towel in hand, wondering how two women I'd only admired from afar had suddenly pulled me into their orbit. It was small talk, that's all, but somehow it felt like the start of something more. I've never been good at reading intentions. Most of the time, when someone looks my way or starts a conversation, I assume it's just polite, nothing more. So when I left the treadmill that night, sweat cooling on my skin, and saw them both waiting near the hallway that led toward the locker rooms, my first thought was that it couldn't possibly be about me. But then they moved. Not aggressively, not even in a way most people would notice. Just enough. The taller one stepped a little to the left, the softer one angled slightly to the right, and before I knew it, the narrow space that had been empty a second ago was filled by them. Always rushing off, the taller one said, her tone light, but her eyes steady on me. You finish your run and disappear. Her friend leaned casually against the wall, her elbow resting on the cool metal locker behind her. She tilted her head, that gentle smile curving again. We were starting to wonder if you're avoiding us. I froze for a moment, caught between embarrassment and something I couldn't quite name. They weren't angry. They weren't mocking me. If anything, their expressions carried a quiet curiosity, like they'd been waiting for this moment. I guess I didn't think you'd notice. The taller one raised an eyebrow, just slightly, and stepped closer. Not close enough to invade, but enough that I felt the shift in air between us. We notice, she said simply. The words lingered in my chest longer than they should have. The softer one laughed gently, easing the tension that had tightened my shoulders. See? He's surprised. Like we've caught him doing something. She pushed off from the locker and moved closer too, brushing her hand against the metal right beside my arm. Her fingers stayed there a second, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. I swallowed, unsure if I should step back or stand my ground. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above us, the distant clank of weights and hum of treadmills muffled by the way they held me in their focus. The taller woman folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. So, tell us, what's the rush? There was no accusation in her voice, only interest. Genuine, steady, undeniable. I found myself laughing, nervous but also strangely lighter. Honestly, I don't think I'm the kind of person people wait around to talk to. That earned me another smile from the softer one. But this time it was different. Not playful, not teasing, just warm. She leaned in just enough that her shoulder brushed mine, a fleeting touch that grounded me in place. Well, she said softly, maybe you should start rethinking that. And for a moment, pressed between the cool steel of the lockers and the warmth of their presence, I realized they hadn't cornered me to trap me. They'd cornered me so I couldn't slip away, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. After that evening in the hallway, the gym felt different. Not physically different, of course. The weights still clanged, the treadmills still hummed, the fluorescent lights still buzzed faintly overhead. But the space between me and the two women had shifted, compressed in a way that made ordinary moments feel layered with possibility. It was on one of those quieter nights, when only a few regulars lingered late, that they suggested we sit. Come with us, the taller one said, gesturing to the bench near the stretching mats. We have a few minutes before closing. I hesitated, the rational part of my brain warning me against lingering too long. But the warmth in their eyes, the gentle confidence in their voices, made me sink down beside them without a word. For a while, we just watched people finish their routines, the room humming softly around us. Then the taller woman leaned back, her arms resting casually on the top of the bench, and asked, "So, what's your life like outside the gym?" It was a simple question, but it carried a weight I hadn't expected. I hesitated. Most people didn't care about the quieter, less spectacular parts of my life. But they seemed to want to know. I don't know, I admitted finally, shrugging. Sometimes I feel invisible, like I'm moving through the world and no one really sees me. The softer one reached out almost immediately, resting her hand lightly on my forearm. Not the kind of touch that demands anything, but a gentle reassurance that someone was listening. You're more noticed than you think, she said softly, her thumb brushing a delicate circle against my skin. Her words made something in me loosen, a small knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I looked at her, at the way her eyes held understanding without pity, and something warmed in my chest. The taller woman shifted slightly, resting an elbow on the back of the bench and letting her gaze linger. I get it, she said, almost quietly. I come here for the same reason sometimes. Not just for exercise, but to feel steady, grounded. It's hard when life's moving too fast. I glanced between them, surprised by the honesty, by the quiet vulnerability that hadn't been there in our brief encounters before. Both of them were confident, composed, undeniably strong. And yet here they were, letting me see the parts of themselves they didn't show to everyone. We talked longer, about routines, about struggles we didn't usually voice, about fears we carried in private. The conversation ebbed and flowed naturally, comfortable but charged with the subtle tension of shared intimacy. Every so often, the physical closeness was impossible to ignore. One woman's knee brushed mine as she shifted to reach for a bottle of water. Another's shoulder pressed lightly against mine as she leaned back. Each touch was fleeting, yet deliberate enough to make my awareness pulse. I realized, sitting there between them, that these moments, ordinary in any other context, were extraordinary here. The laughter, the quiet confessions, the gentle, almost accidental touches, all of it made me feel seen, important, wanted, in the quietest and safest sense of the word. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to sink into the feeling, letting it fill the spaces I hadn't known were empty. The hours we spent sitting on that quiet bench had passed almost without notice. Our conversation had meandered through light laughter, small confessions, and shared observations about the gym, but now there was a pause. Not an awkward one. No, it felt charged, like the air itself had thickened, waiting for something to happen that none of us dared name. I noticed it first in their eyes. Both women were watching me with a careful intensity that made my chest tighten. The taller one leaned slightly forward, her arms uncrossed now, resting loosely on her knees. Her gaze was steady, almost daring, but warm. The softer one's head tilted slightly, her hair falling over one shoulder as she rested a hand lightly on the edge of the bench, just inches from mine. For a moment, we simply existed in the space between words. The distant clatter of weights and the hum of the treadmills faded into background noise. It was as if the gym had contracted around the three of us, leaving only our presence, our quiet breathing, and the faint rhythm of our heartbeats. Then, something small happened. The taller woman reached up and tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. It was a simple gesture, nothing calculated or performative, but the warmth of her fingers brushing my skin made my pulse spike. The tiniest shiver ran through me, and I caught myself holding my breath, caught between the instinct to pull back and the desire to let the moment linger. The softer one shifted slightly as well, resting her hand on my forearm. It wasn't heavy or demanding, just a touch that suggested reassurance, curiosity, and intimacy all at once. My skin tingled where her thumb traced a faint circle, and I suddenly became acutely aware of the subtle warmth radiating from her hand. Neither of them spoke. Words weren't necessary. The silence itself was loaded, each glance and movement weighted with possibility. I could feel it, a quiet, electric current threading through the three of us, fragile and exhilarating. I wanted to speak, to break the spell, but my voice caught somewhere in my throat. The taller woman smiled just slightly, that small, knowing curve of her lips that suggested patience and an unspoken understanding. The softer one's eyes softened in response, a silent invitation to lean in, to stay, to exist in this moment without rushing toward the future or retreating into doubt. Time slowed. Every subtle movement, the brush of their shoulders against mine, the gentle shift of their hands, the way their gazes lingered a fraction too long, made my awareness expand. I felt every heartbeat, every shallow intake of breath, every small impulse of desire tempered by hesitation. I realized then that the moment itself was everything. Not a confession, not a kiss, not even a word spoken aloud. Just this, the shared tension of being close, being seen, being wanted without the need for labels. And I knew, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that this was the point where everything could change. All I had to do was stay. I should have left. The rational part of my brain whispered at me, reminding me of boundaries, of social norms, of the awkwardness of being caught in a private bubble with two women I barely knew. I could step away, slip back into the familiar rhythm of the gym and the hum of the city beyond, and pretend this never happened. But something in their eyes stopped me. The taller one, her posture relaxed but her gaze unwavering, tilted her head slightly and said softly, "Don't go yet." It wasn't a command, not even a plea. It was an invitation. Simple, steady, and somehow impossible to ignore. I hesitated, my pulse quickening, the heat from earlier lingering and now amplifying in my chest. Then I realized that leaving would mean rejecting this moment, this rare, unexpected connection. And the thought made my fingers clench involuntarily. So I stayed. We settled back into the quiet rhythm of conversation, but it was different now. Lighter, easier. The laughter returned, soft and genuine, like a quiet stream flowing through a space that had once been tense. Yet beneath the lightness, the closeness remained, almost tangible. Our shoulders brushed. Occasionally, hands grazed each other, fleeting touches that lingered longer than necessary, warm reminders that the world outside the gym had ceased to exist. The softer woman leaned in, resting her forearm lightly against mine as she reached for a bottle of water. Her touch was casual, yet deliberate, a silent reassurance that it was okay to stay, okay to exist in this shared space. I felt a jolt of warmth at her proximity, my awareness sharpening to every subtle gesture, every flicker of expression. The taller woman's gaze held me steadily, her fingers drumming absent-mindedly on her knee, each movement carrying an understated elegance that drew my attention like a quiet magnet. There was a patience in her presence, a kind of confidence that suggested she understood the hesitation fluttering inside me, and that she didn't mind. We spoke again, lighter topics this time, the upcoming gym classes, favorite workouts, the humor in everyday routines. But every laugh, every shared glance, every brush of contact carried weight. The air around us seemed charged with something that neither of them needed to name, yet all three of us recognized. Time slipped by unnoticed. The fluorescent lights above cast a soft glow, highlighting the curve of their smiles and the warmth in their eyes. The hum of the treadmills and the distant clang of weights became a background melody, fading into insignificance. And as I sat there, caught between instinct and desire, nervousness and comfort, I realized something important. Staying didn't feel risky. Staying felt right. It felt like the first step into a space where I could be seen, truly seen, by two women who carried themselves with strength, warmth, and a quiet vulnerability I hadn't expected. So I stayed. And in that simple choice, I felt the boundaries between us soften, the tension ease, and the quiet promise of something more beginning to take root. The gym was quiet now, almost empty, the last few stragglers packing up and slipping out into the night. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting long shadows along the polished floors, and the air smelled faintly of sweat and sanitizer, mingling with the subtle traces of their perfumes that still clung to me. I felt a small, strange reluctance to leave, not just the gym, but the space I had shared with them over the past hour. Something about their presence had made me feel grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. Something about the way they looked at me, laughed with me, touched me lightly without hesitation, had stirred a quiet warmth that seemed to settle in my chest. They moved toward the exit together, the taller woman glancing back to make sure I followed, her eyes soft yet expectant. The softer one gave me a small, encouraging smile, as if silently saying, "You're welcome here." And then it happened, naturally, without fanfare. The softer woman looped her arm through mine, casually, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. I felt the warmth of her touch travel through me in a gentle surge, grounding me in the reality of the moment. The taller woman rested a hand lightly against my back, guiding me forward, her fingers grazing the fabric of my shirt in a fleeting, almost accidental touch. Each movement was deliberate enough to convey connection, yet subtle enough to feel effortless, like the world had folded in on itself to make space just for us three. We walked in silence at first, the city night wrapping around us like a soft blanket. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the trees lining the street, mixed with the crisp coolness of evening. My pulse slowed in the quiet, each step measured, each glance exchanged loaded with unspoken understanding. The taller woman glanced at me, her lips curving in that small, knowing smile I'd come to recognize, and nodded toward a nearby coffee shop. Next time, maybe we start here, she suggested gently, teasing yet sincere. The softer one's hand tightened briefly on my arm, just enough to make me aware of her presence without a word. We'd like that, she added softly, her eyes lingering on mine. I felt an almost dizzying mix of gratitude, nervous excitement, and comfort. I had never imagined a night like this, simple, quiet, yet brimming with a connection that felt rare and precious. Two women, confident, warm, and unexpectedly vulnerable, had pulled me into a world I hadn't known I was missing. And somehow, I didn't want it to end. Before we parted ways, they exchanged numbers with me, the motions casual, effortless, yet weighted with promise. Not a single word forced the connection. Everything about it was natural, human, intimate without crossing any boundaries. As they finally stepped back, giving me space but leaving the warmth of their presence lingering, I realized the lesson of the night. They hadn't cornered me to trap me. They hadn't pressed me into something uncomfortable. They had invited me, gently, patiently, into a shared moment that mattered, into a space where I could be seen, appreciated, and wanted in the quietest, most human way. And as I watched them walk away, shoulder to shoulder, their laughter echoing faintly behind me, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning, and I was ready to follow where it led.